I still woke up early, just like every other year. Thanksgiving without the sound of a carving knife or the smell of butter sizzling in the pan left me hollow, as if I'd forgotten something essential. In the kitchen, the scent of butter and cinnamon mingled in the air, exactly like every year before. Except this time, the house was so quiet I could hear the spoon tapping against the edge of the bowl. I roasted the turkey out of habit, even though no one needed it this year. Michael always loved the crispy skin and the faint touch of lemon, so I still tucked a few thin slices inside the bird. I didn't know what else to do. My whole life, I've known only how to cook for someone. The phone rang just as the oven beeped. I wiped my hands and picked up. Michael's voice came through, cheerful and light, as if it were nothing at all. "Hey, Mom, Lindsay wants Thanksgiving to be just for our little family this year. Don't worry, we'll stop by to see you later." I stayed silent for a few seconds. On the other end, I could hear the clink of a knife against a cutting board, Lindsay's laughter, and the baby's soft babbling in someone's arms. I heard it all more clearly than my own son's words. My lips tightened as I swallowed hard. Then I whispered, "I understand. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, sweetheart." When the call ended, I remained standing still. Inside the oven, the turkey skin had begun to crackle, the buttery aroma filling the air, yet my heart felt frozen, like ice. I opened the oven door, and the heat rushed to my face, stinging my eyes. On the table, the chair to my right was still empty, the one where I always sat each year, across from Michael, beside the small chair I once added for Lindsay. I still remember her first Thanksgiving with us, her hands trembling as she carried the platter of turkey. I'd told her, "It's okay. As long as the meal has love, it will taste good." Now the meal still has love, just no place left for mine. I turned off the oven, standing in a kitchen thick with the scent of butter, listening to the ticking clock. Each tick sounded like a reminder that sometimes you don't have to do anything to be forgotten. You just have to stay still and wait too long. The house where I wasn't invited was the very house I had once bought for my son. I remember clearly the day Michael married Lindsay. It was drizzling, my coat soaked through, yet my heart was strangely warm. I didn't have much money left, only the small savings from my years of teaching and the extra hours I'd spent working evenings at the grocery store. For 30 years, I never thought of myself. Everything I earned went to Michael. Every shirt, every tuition payment, every late-night meal. I once dreamed of opening a small bakery, but I gave it up because he needed the money for college. The night he received his diploma, I cried for hours, not out of pride, but because I finally felt useful again. After the wedding, I used all my savings to buy them a small house in the suburbs. I never said it was my life savings. I just smiled and said, "Consider it a wedding gift from Mom." I can still remember the moment I handed them the keys. Lindsay hugged me, eyes glistening, whispering, "I'll never forget your kindness." That sentence alone made every hardship worth it. I didn't move in with them. I thought they needed their own space. I stayed in my old house, 20 minutes away, but I stopped by almost every day to clean, do laundry, cook a few dishes, and leave before they came home from work. When Emma was born, I practically lived there. Lindsay was exhausted, Michael was busy, and I spent countless nights rocking the baby to sleep, mopping floors, washing blankets. On nights when Emma cried until dawn, I'd cradle her on the porch so Lindsay could get a little rest. I got used to not being seen. It didn't matter, as long as I could hear the steady rhythm of my granddaughter's breathing. I used to believe that love didn't need acknowledgement, it just needed to be needed. But then things began to change, not through arguments, but through small remarks. "Mom, don't hold Emma too much. She'll get used to it." "Mom, let me raise her my way. Times are different now." I understood. I smiled and said, "You're right, dear. I'm old. I don't know much anymore." But when I heard Lindsay say, "Mom," in that polite, distant tone, I suddenly realized the space between us wasn't home anymore. It was 2 generations standing side by side, careful not to disturb each other. On Emma's first birthday, I was late because my car broke down on the way. By the time I arrived, the party was over, the cake reduced to crumbs on the table. Lindsay said, "Oh, Mom, what a pity. Emma's already asleep." I stood there, still holding the clumsily wrapped gift, a stuffed bear I'd sewn myself, pricking my fingers again and again, just to finish it in time. I placed it on a chair, hiding my trembling smile. They didn't notice, or maybe they simply didn't care. I lied, saying, "It's fine, I just stopped by for a moment," then drove home as rain pattered softly against the windshield. I kept telling myself it was unintentional, that they were young, busy, caught up in their own lives. But slowly I began to understand. In the very house I had bought with my life's work, my love had become a guest. I was the one who kept their fire burning, but I was never invited to sit beside it. The pain of a mother isn't from being hurt. It's from realizing she's grown used to the hurt and has learned to call it normal. That morning I woke earlier than usual. No one had asked me to cook, yet my hands instinctively reached for the pan of butter, the knife for the pumpkin, the jar of cinnamon. Thanksgiving without the smell of something baking in the oven felt like forgetting how to breathe. I made a small pie, Michael's favorite since childhood. When he was little, he'd wait by the oven, eager for that first bite, while it was still steaming hot, laughing even as it burned his tongue. Each time I saw that smile, every ounce of weariness melted away. I once believed that as long as my child was happy, I could stand anywhere, even in the background. By afternoon, the sky broke open with rain. I looked at the clock, then at the pie growing cold on the table. I should have been at Michael's house by now, setting the table, listening to Emma's laughter. Instead, I heard only the rain striking the roof and the heavy beat of my own heart. Maybe, I thought, I could just drop the pie off, leave it by the door, and go. A mother shouldn't let pride ruin her child's holiday. The road to Michael's house was so familiar, I could have driven it with my eyes closed. The house glowed from a distance, lights wrapped around the porch, the faint scent of roasted turkey drifting through the damp air. I parked, grabbed the pie, and stepped out into the rain. The wind bit at my cheeks, but I kept one hand over the ribbon to keep it dry. Through the window, I saw them, gathered around the table. Lindsay carving the turkey, her parents beside her, Emma giggling in her high chair. Michael raised his glass, candlelight dancing on his face. The same smile as always, only now I wasn't part of the picture. I rang the doorbell once, no answer. I rang again. The laughter inside drowned out the tiny sound. Finally, the door creaked open. Lindsay appeared, light spilling out from behind her, and for a moment I felt like I was standing entirely in shadow. "Oh, Mom, I didn't know you were coming. We're in the middle of dinner. You can leave the pie here, I'll bring it in," she said, her voice gentle, polite, the way one might speak to a delivery person. I pressed my lips together, trying to smile. "Of course, I just wanted to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving." My hands trembled, the pie tilted, and the ribbon slipped loose. Lindsay caught it quickly, murmuring, "Thank you, Mom. I should get back inside." Then the door closed. The soft click of the lock echoed faintly, but inside me it thundered. I stood there, rain soaking through my sweater, hair clinging to my face. The golden light from their dining room spilled onto the wet cement, stopping right at the tips of my shoes. One step forward, and I could have felt its warmth, but I couldn't move. In my hand, all that remained was a damp red ribbon, stuck to my skin like a thin wound. I tried to peel it off, but the more I did, the tighter it clung. I laughed softly to myself. Maybe the things that once tied us to someone, even when they break, still leave a mark. I stepped back and looked through the window one last time. Michael kissed Emma's forehead. Lindsay smiled. It was a picture so perfect that anyone passing by would call it a happy family. And perhaps it truly was, just one that no longer had a place for me. I turned away. The rain grew heavier. The road home stretched long and cold. But at least there, I wouldn't have to ring the bell. Sometimes you only realize how alone you are when you're standing outside a house full of light, one that once used to be yours. The next morning, I woke later than usual. My head ached dully from the cold, my shoulders sore, probably from standing too long in the rain the night before. I didn't bother with breakfast, just poured myself a cup of coffee. The steam fogged my glasses, but the warmth never reached my hands. The coffee tasted faint, like something left out overnight. I sat in the quiet kitchen, staring at the untouched turkey on the table. It was cold, the skin shriveled, the fat congealed. I didn't know what to do with it. I just looked, as if looking at myself. Something once carefully prepared, still whole and decent, yet no longer needed. I began tidying the table, wiping the spots where rainwater had splashed onto the floor. When I pulled open the bottom drawer, a stack of documents fell out. I bent down to gather them, and froze when I saw the bold letters printed in the corner. Owner, Evelyn Parker. I stopped breathing for a moment. My eyes lingered on that name, almost as if it belonged to someone else. Evelyn Parker. My name. I flipped through the next page, and the next. The same words stared back at me. I remembered the day I signed the house papers. The office had been crowded, the lawyer speaking quickly, Michael standing beside me, Lindsay's hand in his. Since you're the one making the payment, Mrs. Parker, we'll put the deed under your name for now, the man had said. You can transfer it to your son later if you wish. I'd just smiled. I hadn't thought twice about it. All I'd cared about was giving my son a home. I never imagined. I set the papers down on the table and sat still. Outside, the wind whistled through the crack in the door, carrying the damp scent of leftover rain. I looked again at my name, and this time my heart tightened. It was the only trace of me left in this house. My mind drifted back through the years, the late-night classes I'd taught, the evenings counting coins, the dinners I'd skipped so Michael could have enough for books. I remembered the winters spent shivering in thin coats so he could stay warm. Everything I had, I'd poured into him, my youth, my strength, my belief that a mother's love could never be outgrown. I picked up the paper, my hand trembling slightly. A voice inside me whispered, "No, you can't. Michael and Emma need a place to live." But another voice, tired, quiet, rose to answer, "And what about you? Don't you need a place to live too? You've given everything. What's left for you to keep?" I stood and walked to the window. The sky was still gray. The maple tree out front stood bare, its branches shivering in the wind. I looked down at my hands, dry, cracked, thin. Hands that had once held a spoon to feed my child, wiped away his tears, signed sick notes to watch over his baby. And now those same hands trembled at the thought of holding on to their own name. I turned back to the table, picked up the phone. My finger hovered over the screen for a long time before pressing the call. "Mrs. Evelyn, it's been a while," came Mr. Mark's voice, my old attorney. "Mr. Mark," I said, steadying my breath. If I wanted to sell the house in Beaverton, could I? There was a brief silence on the other end before he replied, "Yes, ma'am. You're the legal owner. You have full rights. But are you sure?" I looked down at the paper again. The soft morning light touched the table, glinting across the words Evelyn Parker like a pale scar. I spoke slowly, clearly, as if to remind myself, yes, this time I'm sure. When I hung up, the phone was still in my hand, my mind blank. I sat back down. The coffee was cold now. I took a sip. The bitterness clung to my throat. Tears slipped down my face, falling into the cup, dissolving like they were never there. All my life, I'd lived for my son. Now, perhaps for the first time, I was learning how to live for myself. The morning I signed the papers to sell the house, the sky was the color of ash. Mr. Mark, the lawyer, said everything would be finalized within 3 days. But his voice sounded distant, muffled by the steady patter of rain against the office window. When he handed me the pen, I noticed how my fingers trembled. My signature came out uneven, the ink smudged by my damp hand. I stared at that faint blur spreading across the paper and realized, for the first time in decades, I was signing something that wasn't for anyone else. Back home, I sat for a long time in the living room, gazing around the empty space. My house was never grand, but every corner held a memory. The chair where Michael had fallen asleep as a boy, the curtains I bought after my first paycheck, the chipped ceramic vase Lindsay once called charming. Looking at them now, they were just objects. Nothing tied me here anymore, yet I couldn't bring myself to let them go. As I packed, each item felt like a piece of my body being taken apart. Even the smallest things not worth keeping, I still brushed gently before placing them into boxes. A photo of Michael at 10, in his blue sweater, smiling wide and bright. My fingers lingered on his face. The feeling was so familiar it hurt, as if someone had just called out, "Mom." I wanted to cry, but no tears came. Only that dry sting behind my eyes. By afternoon, I carried a small suitcase, a few clothes, a handful of old photographs, and left Portland. Santa Barbara welcomed me with sea breeze and the faint salt of the ocean air. The apartment I rented was small, 1 bedroom, 1 wooden table, 1 armchair, and a window that faced the sea. I opened it wide. The sound of the waves hitting the rocks came slow and steady, like an old heart still beating. No one knew what I had lost, and no one needed to. In that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, lightness. A kind so strange, it frightened me. 3 days later, the phone rang. I didn't need to look. I knew it was Michael. I'd been waiting for that call, though I hadn't decided what to say. His voice came through, tight and strained. "Mom, I heard you sold the house." I took a slow breath. "Yes. But that's our house. You said it was a gift. Did you forget?" I stayed quiet. In the background, I heard Emma's little voice, distant but clear. "Daddy, look." Then Lindsay said something softly, her tone warm, familiar. Those sounds made my throat tighten. I pressed my lips together and whispered, "I didn't forget. It's just that some gifts shouldn't be kept forever, not when the ones who received them no longer cherish them." "Mom, I don't understand," Michael said, his voice sharper, then fading lower. "Did I do something wrong? If Lindsay said something that upset you, I'm sorry. But why would you do this?" I smiled, a brittle kind of smile I could almost hear. Crack. "No one's wrong, son. It's just that I'm tired. All my life, I've only known how to give, never how to keep anything for myself. Now I just want a small place where I don't have to stand outside the door, watching someone else's light." There was silence. Then I heard him breathing hard, trying to swallow something heavy. "Mom, Emma's going to ask where you are. What should I tell her?" I closed my eyes. I could see that little face, the round eyes, the smile so much like his when he was small. Tell her Grandma went looking for the sunshine, somewhere a little warmer than that house. After that, there was a soft sob on the other end, and then nothing but the sound of waves beyond my window. I didn't cry. I just sat there, watching the pale red sunset spill across the sky, feeling myself dissolve into its quiet glow, weary but at peace. I set the phone down, my hand still trembling. But this time it wasn't from fear. It was from knowing that for the first time in my life, I had done something entirely and finally for myself. Santa Barbara was quiet in a way Portland never was. Here, mornings broke open with golden sunlight spilling over the sea, the breeze carrying a trace of salt through the balcony and into my small apartment. I started drinking coffee again, something I'd given up years ago for fear of losing sleep. Now sleep came easily, and even when it didn't, I no longer minded. The rhythm of the waves outside was enough. Most mornings I sat on the balcony in an old armchair I'd found at a thrift shop, the fabric worn but soft enough to cradle me. In front of me stretched the ocean, and in the distance a few people walked their dogs along the shore. Next door lived a woman named Helen, 70 years old, who liked to bring me bread she'd baked herself. We didn't talk much, mostly we just sat and watched the sea. One morning she asked, "Have you been here long?" I smiled. "Not really, I just moved in. I'm learning how to live alone." She laughed, deep wrinkles folding across her forehead. "You know," she said, "living alone isn't the hard part. What's hard is living your whole life for others until you forget who you are." I thought about that all the next day. Maybe it had taken me half a lifetime to understand something so simple. I once believed that living for others was the highest form of love, until I realized that when you empty yourself completely, you start to disappear. Every afternoon, I walked along the beach path. The waves brushed against my ankles, gulls circled overhead, and I let my mind drift, not thinking, not remembering, just breathing. One day, a little boy, maybe 5 years old, ran past me and dropped his hat. I picked it up and called out, handing it back. He grinned wide, eyes bright. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, before running off, his small hand waving in the sun. I stood there, watching him disappear into the light. Something inside me softened, a quiet, tender ache that didn't hurt anymore. I began writing letters, not to anyone, just to myself. Little scraps of paper describing the day, how I bought flowers, listened to an old song, baked pumpkin pie again. This time for me alone. I kept the notes in a small wooden box, not for anyone to read, but as proof that I was still here, still living. My apartment wasn't big, but it was enough space to move freely, enough sunlight to pour through the window each morning, enough peace to brew coffee, water my plants, read, and nap. Some evenings I played music and walked around the room. My footsteps echoed softly in the quiet, light, steady, no other voices anymore. But I didn't feel lonely. I wasn't waiting for anyone now. I was simply here, among the wind, the sea, and the light. Sometimes I opened the door wide, letting the salt air weave into my hair, and thought, maybe if I'd learned to walk away sooner, I would have learned to love myself a long time ago. I stopped counting the days since I left Portland. The sea has a way of teaching you that time can move without needing to be measured. But sometimes, in the rhythm of the waves, I still hear something distant, like the muffled breath of someone trying not to cry. I know that sound. It's Michael. A mother doesn't need to be told when her child is hurting. She just knows. Sometimes Mrs. Helen, my neighbor, would read the newspaper and tell me. In Portland, the rains came early this year. The economy's bad. Many people are losing their jobs. I'd smile and joke, my son's stubborn, he'll manage somehow. But when night came, I'd open the window and stare into the dark, listening to the soft patter of rain on the roof. I didn't know why my chest tightened like that. Maybe because I still remember what cold rain feels like when there's only one small lamp left burning in the house. I didn't call him. I couldn't. I was afraid of disturbing him, afraid that a cold voice on the other end might pull me back into old pain. Instead, I wrote letters, not to send, but to soothe myself. Michael, the wind is gentle here, and the sea is calm. I'm doing fine. Today I baked again, the same recipe as always. Only this time you weren't beside me. The butter smelled just as sweet, but I didn't feel hungry anymore. I folded the paper and placed it in the wooden box with the others. Maybe one day, if he ever finds them, he'll understand. But not yet. Once at the market, I saw a young couple arguing over rent. The man's head was bowed. The woman held a crying baby. I stood there, tears falling before I realized. In them, I saw Michael and Lindsay in their early years. The struggle, the pride, the exhaustion. And I saw myself, the woman who once bore it all, just so her child could rest. I thought, maybe now my son is learning what it means to be a father. Maybe he's finally learning what it once meant for me to be a mother. At night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, gazing out at the sea. A thin mist floated over the water, the moonlight spreading across it like silver cloth. I closed my eyes and imagined him in some small apartment, Emma asleep in his arms, Lindsay quietly cleaning the kitchen. I didn't know if they were happy. I only knew that whenever the wind howled too loud, my heart would tighten, as if I could hear someone whisper, "Mom," through the storm. Some nights I dreamt of him knocking at my door. I opened it to find him soaked through, holding a pumpkin pie. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry." And then I woke to darkness and the sound of waves. I don't know where the dream came from longing or from some quiet sense that my son truly is in pain. Either way, I was grateful, because at least in my dreams, he still found his way home. I no longer wait for his call. I only hope he's well. And that someday, when his heart is quiet enough, he'll understand why I had to leave. I didn't go because I was angry. I left because if I'd stayed, I would have disappeared. Even a mother has limits. And when those limits are crossed, love becomes cruelty, not to others, but to oneself. I have loved my son long enough, deep enough. Now I only need to learn how to love myself, so I don't die inside someone else's silence. Some evenings, when the sunset spreads across the sea, I still look north, toward foggy Portland, where my son lives. The wind from that direction carries a chill, salt, and distance. Yet I believe, if love is ever true between two hearts, it will always find its way back home. That day, the sun in Santa Barbara felt different. It wasn't harsh, just soft and warm, like someone gently placing a hand on my shoulder. I was watering the little flower pot on my balcony when I heard a knock on the door. It was a hesitant sound, light and unsure, like someone who wasn't certain they were welcome. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked over. Through the frosted glass, I saw a still figure. A dark coat, shoulders slightly slumped, a few strands of gray in his hair. I opened the door. Michael was standing there. For a moment, time stopped. I didn't know what to say, or even if I was awake. He looked thinner, his eyes shadowed, and in them I saw that same little boy who once ran across the schoolyard, waving his report card high, shouting, "Mom, I did it!" We stood there in silence for a long time. Finally he spoke, his voice rough. as if afraid it might dissolve in the wind. "Mom, I'm sorry." Just 3 words, but my heart trembled. I didn't say, "I forgive you." I didn't rush forward to embrace him. I simply looked at him for a long, long time. The breeze passed over the balcony, brushing the petals of the flowers I'd just watered. The sunlight slanted across his face, and I saw a single tear roll down his cheek. I nodded softly and smiled. "Would you like to come in?" He smiled too, awkwardly, like a child who'd been scolded, but was finally allowed to come home. "Mom, your place is beautiful." "It's not big," I said, "but it's enough for one person." We sat across from each other at the small wooden table. I poured him tea. His hand trembled, the cup clinking lightly against the saucer. "I looked for you," he said, barely above a whisper, as if afraid his words might break something fragile. I turned my eyes toward the sea. "I know." "How could you know?" "A mother always knows, even when her child says nothing." For a while, neither of us spoke. Only the sound of waves and the faint ticking of the clock filled the room. His gaze wandered around the apartment, finally resting on the wooden box on the shelf. "What's that, Mom?" "All the things I wanted to say, but never sent." He looked back at me and gave a small, wistful smile. "I want to hear them now, if you'll let me." I shook my head gently. "You don't need to read them. I didn't write for someone to read. I wrote to remind myself that I'm still alive." His eyes shimmered. I could see something breaking and healing inside him at the same time. I reached out and placed my hand over his. The skin was dry, warm, familiar. The same hand that had once been so small, clutching mine in fear during thunderstorms. Now it was larger, rougher, yet it still trembled when it touched mine. I asked softly, "Do you still keep anything that belonged to me?" He hesitated for a moment, then whispered, "Not much, but I kept everything you once touched." I smiled faintly. "There's nothing valuable I left behind, just old things." He shook his head, voice cracking. "No, Mom, everything you touched is precious." The breeze drifted through the open window. Afternoon light turned golden across the room. I looked at my son. No anger, no sadness left. Only peace, the kind that fills you when you finally take and gain a full breath after years of holding it in. I poured more tea and said quietly, "Stay for dinner, will you? I have pumpkin pie." He laughed, a soft, broken laugh that carried both relief and the sound of long-contained tears. Outside, the sea was still blue, the sky still clear. I looked at my son, and for a brief, beautiful moment, the man before me became once again that little boy, running toward me, waving his report card high above his head. A month later, I received a call from Michael. His voice trembled slightly, though he tried to keep it steady. "Mom, if you're free this year, I'd like you to come have Thanksgiving with us." I looked out toward the sea. The sunlight shimmered faintly across the water, and the breeze felt like a soft invitation. I didn't answer right away. "I'll bring pumpkin pie," I said finally. On the other end, I heard him exhale, a quiet sigh of relief. That afternoon, I arrived at his apartment. It wasn't the big house from before, just a small, humble place in a quiet neighborhood. But there was the smell of butter, the sound of laughter, and warm yellow light spilling through the window. The same light I once watched from the outside, now shining right before me. Lindsay opened the door, her smile shy but genuine. "Mom, I'm glad you came." I nodded. "So am I." No more words were needed. Some wounds can only heal through silence. Emma ran to me, her hair tied in 2 little pigtails, and hugged my legs. "Grandma, did you bring pie?" I laughed, stroking her head. "Of course, Grandma never forgets the pie." She squealed and dashed into the kitchen, her voice ringing like a bell. I watched her go, and my heart softened. Dinner that night was just the four of us, me, Michael, Lindsay, and Emma. The table was small but warm. On it sat roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, and a tiny vase of yellow daisies. Emma had insisted, "These are Grandma's favorite." Michael poured the wine and said quietly, "Thank you, Mom, for coming." I smiled. I never went that far. The room filled with soft chatter, laughter, and the smell of butter and cinnamon. I glanced around and saw new photos on the wall, pictures of Emma at school, family portraits of the three of them, and one smaller frame resting on a shelf, Michael and me, taken on his graduation day. No one mentioned who put it there, but I already knew. When Emma cut into the first slice of pie, she said proudly, "Grandma, yours is way better than Mommy's." Lindsay laughed, not offended at all. Our eyes met, and in that brief exchange we smiled, understanding something unspoken. We both loved the same person, just in different ways. After dinner, Michael cleared the table while I stepped out onto the balcony. The night was quiet, the air soft. Warm light spilled through the window, casting the shadows of the four of us across the floor. Inside, I heard Emma's voice. "Daddy, take a picture. Grandma's here too." Michael replied, "Hold on, sweetheart, I'm coming." I turned around and smiled. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider. When the camera flashed, I closed my eyes for a heartbeat. In that brief second, 1,000 memories flickered through me. The first dinner I cooked for them, the night I stood outside in the rain, the document-marked owner, Evelyn Parker, the small apartment by the sea. They all flowed together like a dream, and I understood Thanksgiving isn't about being grateful for what's perfect. It's about learning to be thankful for what once broke you. I looked at my son, my daughter-in-law, my granddaughter, all laughing under the same light. The room was small, but my heart had never felt so vast. I once thought that being a mother meant always staying, always enduring, always giving, until I realized that sometimes leaving is the only way to protect what's pure in love. I once stood outside a house full of light, my heart swallowed by darkness. Now I sit within that light, not because I belong nor because I don't, but because I am finally at peace. That's what motherhood is. We love with everything we have, until that love makes us forget ourselves. But one day, if we're brave enough to love ourselves, the way we once loved our children, we'll understand. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about stopping before love becomes pain. I'm no longer young nor strong, but I've learned one simple truth. Happiness doesn't live in any house. It lives wherever you have the courage to open your heart again. Sometimes love doesn't need to be loud. It just needs someone to remember the smell of the pumpkin pie you once baked. And that's enough to know you were never truly lost to one another. If anyone asked me what the most precious Thanksgiving is, I'd say, it's the one where you learn to be thankful even for your old scars. Because they're the ones that teach you how to love more gently, how to stay silent without resentment, and how to smile even when your heart still trembles.